All right, let's talk about something that every single one of us has run into, the absolute chaos of managing data inside our apps. Today, we're going to dive into Redux, a really powerful tool that's designed to bring some much-needed order and predictability to your app's state.
Seriously, have you ever been there? You're deep into a project, you're adding features, and then suddenly you have no clue where your data's coming from, who's changing it, or why on earth the shopping cart total is just wrong. It's just this tangled web, right? Yeah, you are definitely not alone.
So to really get a feel for this problem, let's paint a picture. We're going to tell a little story about a pretty typical e-commerce app and a kind of chaos that can just bubble up from something that seems so simple at first.
So imagine you're building this app. It's got all the standard stuff. Users can log in, they can look at products, they can add things to a cart, and of course, they can check out. Seems pretty standard, right? No big deal.
Okay, so if you're just using something basic like React's useState, your data ends up all over the place. Your login component has the user info, the nav bar is keeping track of the cart count, the product list has, well, the products. Every single piece of your app becomes its own little island of state.
So what happens when a user does something super simple, like just adding one thing to their cart? Well, the product list needs to know, the nav bar has to update that little number on the cart icon, the cart itself needs to show the new item, and the checkout page has to recalculate the total. All of a sudden, that one click has to trigger updates in 4 different spots, all at the same time.
And this right here is where the chaos kicks in. Like, which update happened first? Did one of them fail? If you find a bug, where do you even begin to look? When your state is scattered all over the place and updates are firing from everywhere, your app's behavior just becomes impossible to track, a nightmare to debug, and you guessed it, completely unpredictable.
Okay, but what if there was a way to escape this mess? A way to make everything orderly, predictable, sane? Well, this is where Redux comes into the picture. It's the solution designed specifically to bring structure and clarity to exactly this kind of chaos.
So what exactly is Redux when you boil it down? It's a library that takes all your app's global state and puts it into one single central location. And that's centralization. That's the absolute key to making your data flow predictable. Let's dig into what that word, predictable, really means here.
The best way to think about this is like a traffic light. A traffic light follows strict rules. It goes from red to green to yellow, always. You always know what's coming next. It's a predictable system. The other option is just chaos, right? Anyone can change the signal whenever they want, and you get accidents. Redux turns your app's data flow from that chaotic intersection into a perfectly behaved traffic signal.
All right, so we get the why. It brings order to chaos. But how does it actually pull this off? Let's break it down into its 5 core pieces. I promise, once you get these 5 things, the magic of Redux will make perfect sense.
Here they are, the 5 main pieces of the whole Redux puzzle. You've got the store, an action, a dispatch function, a reducer, and a selector. Don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds. We're going to walk through each one using a super simple counter app to see how they all work together.
Okay, first up, the store. This is the heart and soul of Redux. It's really just one big JavaScript object that holds the entire state for your whole application. So for our little counter app, it might just be an object that says, count 0. That's it. This is our single source of truth, and having just one place to look for all your data is an absolute game changer for debugging.
All right, piece number 2 is the action. Think of this like a little memo or a message. It's just a plain object that describes what you want to do, but, and this is key, it doesn't actually do it. For example, an action might just have a type property that says increment. It's just an instruction.
So you've got this message, this action. How does it get to the store? Well, that's where dispatch comes in. When a user clicks a button in your app, you don't just go in and change the state. No way. Instead, you call dispatch, and you hand it your action object. You're basically sending a formal request to the store asking for a change.
And this is super important. Dispatch doesn't change the state. It sends the action to the reducer. And the reducer, well, that's the real brain of the whole operation. It's a special function that takes in the old current state and the action you just sent, and its only job is to look at them and decide what the brand new state should be.
And here's what it looks like in code. This function gets the current state and the action we dispatched. It then uses this switch statement, which is just a fancy way of saying if this, then that, to look at the action's type. If the type is increment, it returns a totally new state object where the count is 1 higher.
And if it sees an action it doesn't recognize, it just returns the old state, completely untouched. Nothing breaks.
Okay, so the store gets updated. Great. But how does our app, the user interface, actually find out about the change? That's the final piece of the puzzle, the selector. A selector is just a little function you write to pull out, or select, the exact piece of data your component cares about from that big store. Your component uses that selector, and Redux is smart enough to know that when that specific data changes, your component needs to update.
So let's put it all together. Let's do a quick recap of the entire flow. A user does something in the UI which dispatches an action. That action goes to the reducer, which figures out what the new state should be. The store updates with that new state, and finally the UI, which is watching that data with a selector, automatically re-renders to show the new information. It's a perfect, predictable circle, no surprises.
All right, Redux sounds pretty amazing, right? It's powerful, but that does not mean you should just slap it onto every single project you build. The last, and maybe the most important question is, when is it actually the right tool for the job?
Let's break it down, side by side. If you're working on a smaller app, or your global data is pretty simple and doesn't change that often, React's built-in useContext is probably your friend. It's simpler. But when that app starts to get large, when the state gets really complex, when you have lots of frequent updates, and especially when you have a whole team of developers working on it, that's when the strict, predictable power of Redux really starts to shine.
So the next time you're about to build something new, just take a second and ask yourself this question. Does what I'm building need simple, straightforward state, or does it need predictable power? Because choosing the right tool is one of the biggest keys to building apps that are not just powerful, but also a joy to maintain. Thanks for joining this explainer.